Boruto spent his time wasting away the days. After recovering what the Uzumaki had dubbed the Scroll of Secrets, lessons at the academy had been cancelled. The Uzumaki was far too busy deciphering the scroll to teach them personally, so Boruto had little to do but train himself and help the villagers with their day-to-day tasks. He had become somewhat of a celebrity in the village for his role in preventing the masked monsters from destroying the clan. The workers, especially the burly Uzumaki men that had taken it upon themselves to guard Bolt, had been all too happy to spread word of his tale. And then, one day, it all came to an end. Boruto was standing around with a group of younger Uzumaki men, their crimson hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. They were taking a short break from clearing the rubble when Kohaku found him, a grim expression adorning his features. Boruto knew something had happened, something bad. The Uzumaki has requested your presence, Boruto, he informed him seriously. Boruto just nodded weakly, waving unceremoniously to his previous company. Kohaku led him to a smaller, more utilitarian house. Burned into the wood over the front door was the Uzumaki crest, its swirling pattern clearly visible. This was the Uzumaki's office, Boruto knew. He was right. Inside, Akane sat behind a desk of wood that had been stained red, as close to the color of the Uzumaki hair as possible. Numerous scrolls, maps, and letters were scattered across the office, paperwork piled high on her desk. It was eerily reminiscent of the Hokage's office, though smaller and more humble, befitting of the smaller village. A window was open to the Uzumaki's right, where a tall wooden post was standing in the corner of the room. Perched upon the post was a hawk, a small black metal tube lashed to one of its feet. Boruto recognized it as the Hidden Leaf's messenger hawk instantly. His insides began to twist and cramp, and he felt his heart began to beat faster. The Uzumaki lifted her head, her hands stilling from the letter she had been writing. The hawk watched her with a keen intelligence. She favored Boruto with a small, reassuring smile before finishing her letter with a flourish. Rolling the letter up, she withdrew a stamp and placed a wax seal with a swirling pattern on it, before entrusting it to the hawk. Boruto watched with a heavy heart as the hawk squawked and took to the skies through the window. As you no doubt have guessed, the Uzumaki began, drawing Boruto's attention. Events are in play that I cannot halt. The Hokage has written me and informed me that he will be visiting the village in a week's time as part of the Hidden Leaf's yearly contribution to our village. He has also asked me if I've seen his son. The Uzumaki fixed him with an apologetic stare. I can hide you no longer, she said. You told him, didn't you? Boruto asked, horrified. He had trusted these people. He could have died for them, and they sold him out. The Uzumaki nodded slowly. I told him that a young boy had come to our village and claimed that he was of our clan's descent, she said. Boruto's shoulders slumped and he hung his head. I also told him that he fit the description of Boruto Uzumaki, she continued on. Boruto felt anger welling up inside him, and a pressure behind his eyes that threatened to spill tears. This couldn't be happening, not again. I also told him that, whoever that boy was, he had left last week without saying a word of where he was headed. The Uzumaki explained with a small, playful smile. Boruto looked up, clearly disbelief written on his face. He felt the shackles of his previous life come undone. The Uzumaki hadn't given him up. We protect our own, even from our own, the Uzumaki told him. But I have others I must protect, an entire village that relies on me to rebuild our clan and our way of life. We depend on the Hidden Leaf, and I cannot jeopardize their aid just to spare you. When your father arrives, he will no doubt question me thoroughly, and come to the conclusion you were here. Therefore, you will leave the hidden Eddy tomorrow morning, the Uzumaki said, her voice firm and clear, leaving no room for argument, yet it was not unkind. Akane lowered her head and returned to her paperwork. Her dismissal of him was clear. Boruto swallowed. He felt a hand rest on his shoulder comfortingly. Kohaku gave him an understanding, encouraging nod. Boruto returned it half-heartedly. He shuffled from the Uzumaki's office, his eyes fixed on the ground. He had grown to like the village, the people. Although he knew it was naive, he thought that maybe, just maybe, he could stay there. He was wrong. He made his way to his guest house, keenly aware that it was just about to become a guest house, not his guest house. Collapsing into bed, he quickly fell asleep, despite the sun still being high in the sky. He awoke early the next morning, before the sun had even risen. It was dark, and the moon still crested the horizon. The first rays of the sun were lighting up the sky opposite the moon. He sat in bed, melancholy about losing a home he never really had. Eventually the sun rose, and a new dawn came. A soft knocking at the door roused Boruto from his stupor. He stood and dressed in a methodical fashion, gathering up what meager worldly belongings he still had. It didn't amount to much. A worn backpack, a scroll that held his clothes, some sets already threadbare from travel, a scroll that held his spare kunai and shuriken, and another that held his camping gear. Boruto was thankful that he had learned sealing jutsu. Instead of a heavy pack, now all he had was a light burden of paper scrolls. As an afterthought, he packed some food from the pantries. Walking with stolen steps, Boruto answered the door. A grim-faced Kohaku met him, with the somber Uzumaki behind him. Boruto nodded. Nothing needed to be said. Following them, they made their way down the river into old hidden Eddy, and through the sprawling grassy hills that made up the land of whirlpools. They passed through a small wooden area before the dirt turned to sand, and Boruto was standing on a beach once more. The land of water is a dangerous place these days, Uzumaki said suddenly. That is where you were planning on going next, right? Boruto nodded. Yeah, he said simply. The Hidden Mist had some of the most powerful water release masters in the entire world. If he was going to truly master that element, then there was no other place then to go than the land of water. The Uzumaki nodded. Very well. Ever since the end of the Fourth Great War, the nations have slowly begun to cooperate with each other. The first thing they did was to set rules for the operations of their ninja. Many missions that were once common were outlawed. Assassination, espionage, interrogation, kidnapping. That there are certain people, she spat the last word, as if they weren't even worthy of humanity, who still require such services. Mercenaries have sprouted up, and not just in the land of water. In every country, offering these services to the highest bidder. The other countries have cracked down hard on them, but the land of water is little more than chains of islands, sparsely populated and stretched out over thousands of miles of rough sea. The mercenaries hide, moving from island to island. The Hidden Mist has had trouble breaking them. You should be careful, the Uzumaki explained, her voice thawing with genuine concern. I will, Boruto said, with a reassuring nod and a small smile. Akane nodded, a wry smile on her lips. In that case, we bring gifts, she declared. Hold out your arm. Boruto did so. The Uzumaki slipped the sleeves of his jacket back, exposing pale flesh. She turned his arm over, caressing his forearm. Before Boruto could ask what she was doing, she pressed a finger into the soft flesh of his wrist. Inky black markings flowed across his skin, making a small seal that Boruto recognized as an enclosing and unsealing matrix seal, the extra characters denoting that it was designed for flesh, not paper. The Uzumaki released him, reaching into the folds of her robes and withdrawing a long, ornate scroll. The paper was a pleasant shade of sky blue, capped with silver metal at both ends that was fashioned to resemble the Uzumaki clan crest. She held it out to him expectantly with a triumphant smile. The next time I see you, I expect your mastery of your clan's jutsu to be superb, she said imperiously. This scroll should guide you through the rest of your education, and even teach you a few things that the others won't learn, she added. Boruto couldn't help but smile as he took the scroll, fumbling as he tried to work the seal on his forearm. Akane sighed, taking the scroll and pressing one end of the seal before tapping a character. She handed it back to Boruto, who repeated her actions, this time channeling chakra into the character. The scroll disappeared in a plume of smoke. Boruto marveled at the seal. He didn't feel anything, but a sixth sense told him he could call upon the scroll at any time if he so chose. Clenching and unclenching a fist, he raised his head, swiveling between the Uzumaki and Kohaku. Thank you for everything, he said, inclining his head respectfully, before turning on his heel and making his way to the water's edge. Kohaku coughed once, clearly false, yet catching Boruto's attention all the same. He turned and felt cold metal slam into his nose. Catching the falling object on instinct, he immediately raised his hands to cup his smarting face. What was that for? Boruto screamed. Thankfully, nothing was broken. Kohaku rolled his eyes, nodding at the scrape of metal and black fabric in Boruto's hands. Boruto realized, with no small amount of amazement, that he held a hidden Eddy headband. You're gonna have to defend yourself at some point. Better to have an explanation when people start asking which village you're from. Rogue ninja aren't viewed favorably in any country. Consider yourself an honorary member of the Hidden Eddy. "For services rendered," he said nonchalantly. Boruto beamed. Yeah, just keep the other headband hidden, and if you disgrace our name, I'll hunt you down," Kohaku warned. Boruto's smile widened. "What rank am I?" he asked enthusiastically. Kohaku scoffed. "Of course. Considering you didn't beat me once in all of our spars, that makes you a chunin," he said. That was good enough for Boruto. He had failed one chunin exam, only to succeed in another, more important one. "I'll be back to claim my title as the strongest jonin of the hidden Eddy one day, you know," Boruto declared with an arrogant grin. Yeah, sure you will, kid," Kohaku said, waving him off. Boruto grinned in feral amusement as he turned, kneeled, grabbed a fistful of sand, and flung it at Kohaku even as he sprinted towards the water. He heard muttered curses and sputtering and spitting as Kohaku tried to get the sand out of his mouth. Boruto smirked in victory. Channeling chakra into his feet, Boruto transitioned from sand to water, bobbing up and down with the waves. He felt the spray of the sea hit him in the face, and knew that by his journey's end, he was going to thoroughly hate the ocean. It was not how Boruto expected to spend his 13th birthday. Holed up in a small cove on a tiny speck of an island, he waited out the storm. It was the 3rd day since he left the hidden Eddy, and mere hours into his journey, dark storm clouds began to form in the sky, and a light rain drizzled down. Now it was thundering and the rain came down sideways. Sniffling, Boruto rubbed his hands together, trying to stay warm. He nibbled on a small piece of jerky that he had packed during his rushed exodus from his house. He felt his sweet tooth ache for a good cake, preferably one his mother made herself, like she did for Himawari's birthday. The thought of his family made his heart ache. He missed his home, his room. He missed his mother. Grudgingly, he even missed his father. But most of all, he missed Himawari. His sister was probably taking his disappearing the hardest. They were close, and Boruto watched out for her since their father was too busy for them. Now he felt guilty and homesick, on top of being cold. It was the worst birthday ever. Standing, he made his way onto the water. His chakra reserves had recovered enough to continue on, and the storm had calmed. Dodging rogue waves, Boruto made his way towards a large island on the horizon. It was one of the few named islands in the Land of Water. There were only a handful. The rest were tiny and inconsequential, atolls, reefs, and spits barely large enough for a single home to be built upon. The afternoon sun shone through the pregnant storm clouds, warming Boruto slightly. He sighed in relief. It seemed as if the storm was finally, after 3 days, breaking. By the time the clouds cleared and the clear blue sky shone down on him, he was already walking through the black sand of the beach. Feeling solid land under his feet after so long at sea was a bigger relief than Boruto expected. He managed to drag his weary body into town, the villagers eyeing him with clear distrust. He found the nearest inn, a small, shoddy building that looked like its roof leaked. He reached into his pockets, pulling out a few ryo. He didn't have enough to buy food, let alone a room. Sighing, he walked into the inn and purchased a steaming hot bowl of soup. The soup warmed him, driving away the cold. He passed the hours by listening to the other patrons talk and tell stories, stifling his giggles every time they erupted into laughter over a joke. Then night came, and the patrons retreated to their rooms, while the night crowd poured in, ordering strong drinks. Boruto could smell the sharp bite of alcohol from where he sat. Boruto watched as the men drunk themselves into a stupor. One of the larger ones, clearly heavily intoxicated, had the audacity to grope their waitress's ass. She slapped him, hard. The man fell backwards out of his chair, unconscious and drooling. His friends picked him up off the floor and took him home. Boruto decided to excuse himself. He wandered back through the town, making his way to a covered alleyway he had seen on his way in. With a defeated sigh, he withdrew a thick blanket from one of the scrolls and collapsed on the ground, wrapping the fabric around himself like a cocoon. Within moments, he was asleep. He awoke to the sound of fabric on metal. Blinking his eyes to clear the sleep, he saw that 2 children no older than 5 had managed to steal his backpack, and were now rifling through its contents. Boruto shot up, reaching out and snatching the pack before they could steal anything. He noted, sadly, that it was lighter than before. The kids took off at a sprint, disappearing into the maze of alleys. Boruto knew he would never catch them. Taking stock of what he had lost, Boruto was relieved to find that they had only taken food. All of his food. Now he wasn't so relieved. "Those little shits!" Boruto roared, slinging his pack over his shoulders and sprinting through the alleyways. He'd wring their necks. He ran in circles, never finding a trace of the kids. Boruto felt his chakra bubble as he seethed with anger. Stalking out of the alleyway he was in, he muttered under his breath. He was broke, cold, homeless, and now he was starving. Just great. Emerging into a small dirt road, Boruto stilled as he heard two distinct pairs of footsteps echo down the road. Lingering in the shadows, he waited. Two men, ninja, he amended, strode down the road. They wore dark pants and heavy jackets, their faces bland and average. Wrapped around their skulls was a long length of red fabric that ran just past their shoulders. Shiny metal plates, both depicting the hidden mist crest, were sewn to the front, protecting their foreheads. Most telling of all, however, was that one of the headbands was different than the other. One had a long scratch through it, marking the ninja as a rogue. Boruto swallowed and calmed his breathing. He had no reason to be afraid of these men. It was just odd that a hidden mist ninja would associate with a rogue. But the cloth they used wasn't a standard issue one. Perhaps friends, family from the same clan, old teammates? The men strode past Boruto, never noticing he was there. Boruto sighed in relief, pulling out his blanket and wandering back into the alleyway. He found a spot underneath a large awning that would keep him dry. Curling up, he went back to sleep, after making sure no stray kids could rob him, again. A long, grueling, hungry week passed by in the blink of an eye. Boruto held his stomach as it rumbled. He'd spent the first few days looking for work, odd jobs mainly, offering services as a ninja occasionally. He sported the hidden Eddy headband proudly. It wasn't a crime for a foreign ninja to be in another country after the end of the Fourth Great War, but it was still an odd sight to behold, especially when you were supposedly from the hidden Eddy. He got a lot of speculative, disbelieving looks. That, combined with his young age, earned him exactly zero prospects. The people of the Land of Water didn't trust him, and no one was kind enough to give him a helping hand. For the first time, Boruto realized how truly alone he was in the world. He had been lucky. He lived his sheltered life in the Hidden Leaf, then relied on the generosity of the people of the Land of Fire to make it as far as he had. The hidden Eddy only helped him because he was family. These people owed him no such loyalties. Now, to his great shame, he had sunk lower than he ever thought possible. He was about to become a thief. Boruto was 100% certain he would drop dead tomorrow if he didn't eat. Maybe. So he was going to steal some food. Not a lot, he reasoned. The shopkeeper would hardly notice that it was missing. The place he was watching from the rooftop across the street was the largest and most successful stand in the entire village. Everyone shopped there. They had the widest selection of fruits and vegetables on the island, and the freshest product. There was so much food that it couldn't possibly even be sold, especially the prices the shopkeeper was charging. He knew now why the little kids had robbed him. They couldn't afford to eat either. Thinking back on that night, he should have known something was off. The kids were young, too young to be thieves by choice. Their clothes were baggy and threadbare, and he remembered that their arms and legs were almost comically thin. That cemented in Boruto's mind that there was something fishy going on in this village. He resolved to help these people solve their problems. Right after he himself was no longer starving, of course. Night came, the sun slumbered, and the moon rose. The shopkeeper flipped the sign from open to closed, and hung his white apron on a hanger near the entrance before strolling cheerfully down the dirt road to his home. Dropping from the roof with practiced silent ease, Boruto darted across the road and over to the shop. Casting a few quick glances down the road to make sure he was alone, he grasped the doorknob and twisted it. The door didn't open. Locked. Boruto wasn't surprised. Reaching into one of the pouches on his waist, he withdrew two small metal instruments, a torsion wrench and a hook pick. Lockpicking was standard survival training in the academy. He never had a reason to use those skills until now, but he was forever grateful for Professor Aburame that had forced him to learn. Boruto fumbled with the lock, clumsily trying each of the tumblers of the lock with his pick while the wrench held everything in place. He thought he felt one of the tumblers click into place, so he moved on to the next. After 5 minutes of uncomfortably kneeling in front of the door, the lock clicked, and Boruto turned the doorknob and quickly darted inside, stowing the tools of his trade back into his pouch. He was rewarded with the sight of row upon row of food. Helping himself to a plastic bag, he quickly shuffled through the store, shoving fistfuls of apples, peaches, and oranges plus a few bananas into it. Taking his fill in under a minute, he shrugged off his backpack and stowed the stolen goods. Making his escape, he peered out the front window, sighing in relief as no one had seen him or sounded the alarm. Locking the door, he shut it quietly and darted back into the alley he had come from. Plopping down, Boruto unzipped his backpack and took out a rosy red apple. Biting into it, he moaned audibly. It was the first thing he had to eat in longer than he could remember. He devoured it greedily, savoring the sweet juices. Reaching to his back, he took out an orange. Low chuckles interrupted his feast as he went still, his senses on high alert. Two men, the ninja he had seen nearly a week ago with the red hidden mist headbands, were perched on the roof above him, watching him like hawk's-eyed mice. Boruto could see it in their eyes that they had known what he had just done. Boruto hurled the orange like a kunai. It sailed through the air with an audible hiss, striking the ninja who had the scratched headband on the face. Slipping his backpack on and closing it in all the same motion, he ran. Boruto's heart hammered in his chest and his breath came fast and deep as his legs pumped, propelling him farther and farther away from the mist ninja. Casting an uneasy look over his shoulder, Boruto nearly had his eyes gouged by the outstretched hand of one of the men who had been grabbing at him. Adrenaline coursed through his veins and his heart beat even harder. He channeled chakra into his legs, increasing his speed. These men were experienced, veterans, easily high chunin or jonin ranked ninja. He didn't want to find out what his odds were in a fight. Boruto flew across the land, a blonde blur in the night, the hidden mist ninja on his heels the entire way. When Boruto felt his stamina begin to wane, and the men behind him showed no sign of giving up the chase, he knew he would have to either surrender or fight. He chose to fight. Leading the men to a small inlet near the edge of the island he had seen on his way in, Boruto began to rattle off strategy after strategy in his mind. He was outnumbered, likely outpowered, likely had less experience. He didn't get a good look at their faces, so he didn't know their age, possibly veterans of the Fourth Great War. He dropped down over the ledge and onto the sand, turning to face his pursuers. They followed him mere seconds afterwards, panting and slightly breathless, a sheen of sweat on their foreheads. Both sides stared the other down. Now that Boruto could get a good look at them, they were young, younger than he thought, perhaps in their early 20s, too young to be veterans of the Fourth Great War. Their faces lacked the baby fat that sheltered ninja had, and their bodies were thin with wiry muscle. They lived hard lives, Boruto deduced. Nothing like the ninja of the hidden leaf. He saw their eyes move from his face to his headband, then back to his face. The one whose headband was unmarred, straightened, smirking cockily. "You've got some balls, brat, stealing from the great Crimson Tide. Do you know what we do to thieves, little boy?" Boruto swallowed, shaking his head. "Who are you two?" he managed to ask, his nerves screaming for him to attack and get the battle over with already. "We are members of the illustrious Crimson Tide, the most powerful mercenary company in the land of water, and we are the rulers of this here little shit of an island, and the owners of that shop you just stole from," the same man explained, while the man with the scratched headband glared at him murderously. Mercenaries, Boruto thought with dread. The Uzukage had warned him, and he had still managed to get himself in trouble. "I'm gonna cut your fucking hands off, you little bastard," the man with the scratched headband snarled. Boruto paled. He definitely didn't want to fight the rogue ninja now. Both men smirked and lowered their bodies. Boruto mirrored them, slipping into the first stance of the gentle fist. The rogue ninja leapt forward, roaring savagely. He fought like a brawler, swinging his fist wide. It was all power and no speed or precision, but Boruto could tell he would be hurting if he took a single hit. The strike sailed wide, missing him by a foot or more. Boruto took the opportunity to land two quick open palm hits on the man's exposed ribs. The rogue ninja stumbled back, wheezing. His friend was right behind him, already fighting Boruto. His taijutsu was classical and technical, all smooth practice strikes with no inefficient movements. Boruto ducked and weaved as he evaded punches and kicks. He saw out of the corner of his eye that the rogue ninja had recovered and was waiting for a chance to jump in. His face was warped with rage. Boruto caught a glancing punch to his face that tore at his ear. He felt warm blood run down his cheek. Taking a few steps backwards to right himself, Boruto brought his hands together. He weaved hand seals, water release, water bullet jutsu. Lances of water spewed from his lips as the two mist ninja danced between his jutsu. They laughed. He saw them raise their hands as one, forming a single seal. They didn't even say a word. Thick mist began to spew from their lips, obscuring the beach. The two of them disappeared without a sound. Boruto released his jutsu and sunk into a defensive gentle fist stance. He strained his ears, listening for the two ninja he knew lurked in the mist, but could not see. Boruto felt the whisper of wind against his skin. He turned on instinct to face his opponent. Out of the mist came the technical fighter. He met his punch with the open palm of the gentle fist. Lancing his chakra through the man's hand, he saw him wince in pain and reel back. Boruto had momentarily forgotten he faced two opponents. He remembered as the rogue ninja savagely kicked him in the gut, bodily sending him crashing into the cliff off the cove with an audible crack. They circled him like wolves, and Boruto struggled to get to his feet. The very real fear of having his hands cut off for theft kept him from surrendering. His eyes danced between his two attackers, looking for weaknesses. They smirked, and the mist consumed them once again. A thought arced through Boruto's mind. The mist. He couldn't see them. They couldn't see him. Cupping his hands, he began to channel his chakra. Rotation, power, containment. They came for him again, both at the same time, using the same strategy. The technical fighter came in first, with the rogue ninja trailing right behind him. Instead of meeting his first with a gentle fist, he met it with a roaring Rasengan. The man screamed and exploded in light and pressure that caused the mist to dissipate. Holy shit, Boruto heard someone utter. He turned and came face to face with the rogue ninja's fist. Boruto felt his nose break, or at least he hoped it was his nose, and not something more important, like his face. Collapsing onto his back, Boruto cradled his face with both hands, moaning in pain. He saw two wet spots in the sand where his Rasengan had obliterated the man. Water clones, he realized. The rogue ninja grabbed him by the throat, squeezing and lifting him off his feet. Boruto felt the rock of the cliff dig into his back as the man choked him ruthlessly. The man's visage swam in his eyes. Boruto unleashed weak, feeble, gentle fist strikes against the man's arm as he continued to throttle him. He saw darkness begin to creep into his peripheral vision and felt the man's fingers squeeze tighter. He wasn't going to cut off his hands. He was going to kill him. Boruto felt his eyes bulge at the realization, and a sudden pressure overwhelmed him. The world faded from his eyes, washed into hues of blue. Blue, not black. It felt like he had been living his life through a haze. A mist, like the mist the two ninja used. Now it had dissipated. He saw more clearly than he ever had before in his life. He felt the rogue ninja's chokehold relax. Boruto looked into the eyes of the man, and he saw clear surprise adorning his features. Boruto's eyes lowered to the man's chest. He saw a flaming ball of fire in the man's gut. With grace he didn't know he had, he reached out and gently poked the man's belly. He dropped like a sack of rocks, clutching his abdomen in pain and breathing through labored, hissing breeze. Boruto turned to face the other man. He saw the man's eyes stare deep into his own, examining his every feature. That is, he uttered, taking in Boruto's eyes, bulging veins that thrummed with the beat of his heart. Wide eyes with pale violet irises. To the uneducated, they would have appeared sightless. That could have not been further from the truth. The Byakugan, a voice finished. Boruto experienced the very unnerving sensation of seeing behind his body without having to turn his head, as an older man flickered into existence and knocked him unconscious. "Ah, I'm so tired of this boat," Sarada complained. Mitsuki was staring off into the distance, quiet and antisocial as always. Konohamaru was asleep, his head rocking with the motions of their small craft. Their Anbu escort, Yamato, was very green in the face, trying to quell his motion sickness. Sarada made sure to keep an eye on him. She wasn't even sure if Yamato was his real name. Probably not, she decided. She also had a second, more base motive, making sure he didn't pass out. They were currently in the middle of an ocean in a land of water, sailing a small sailboat made out of Yamato's wood release. It was sturdy and light, but would disappear in an instant if the caster fell unconscious or asleep. "Don't worry, I'm sure," Yamato said, pausing as his cheeks puffed up. He swallowed his rising bile before continuing. "I'm sure we'll be there soon. Sarada hopes so, for Yamato's sake, if not her own." The Mizukage granted them permission for an extended mission in the Land of Water, as well as support from local operatives across the land. In exchange, they were to assist in quelling the civil unrest that had been plaguing the region whenever possible. Due to the geography of the Land of Water, consisting mostly of long island chains, centralized ninja support was sometimes hard to come by. It took days, sometimes an entire week, to reach the farthest islands. That was where they came in. While searching for Boruto, they would help the locals. They were currently en route to a small island chain, the largest of which was the furthest western island of the Land of Water. Their mission? Investigate claims of a mercenary company that had allegedly claimed the island for themselves. "Hey Yamato," Sarada said, getting the Anbu's attention. "What was the name of the mercenaries we're going after again?" Yamato sighed. The Crimson Tide," he answered.